So in this video, I'm going to demonstrate my #1 method for quote-unquote faking jazz. Truth be told, I am a rock drummer, and I've always favored loud playing styles of any percussion instrument, whether I was behind the drums in a rock band or in a drum line with a snare drum strapped to my back. But of course I can appreciate other musical styles such as classical and jazz, as most people. And so I always listen to these types of music, and that's the most important part, is listening. And during many of my listening and jazz appreciation styles, I made one important observation, and that is, when we play rock drums, we tend to make a balance of about 80% to 20% in favor of the drums. And then when we play jazz and the timekeeping, we tend to do just the opposite. 80% cymbals, 20% jazz. Now, I know some people say top to bottom, and I'm not a fan of that analogy because, top, they mean snare drum and ride cymbal, hands more on jazz, and then feet more in rock. I tend to like better to say that you use 80% of the drums in rock and 80% of the cymbals in jazz, specifically in the timekeeping. And I find that keeps us a bit more honest and still gives us a nice general approach for someone who specializes in rock to go to jazz, but then doesn't sort of, make it, too generalized, or else you get, things like a weak hi-hat and all other kinds of stuff. But anyways, you can't just listen to jazz music. Of course, that is the first part. And make these observations and then automatically become a jazz drummer. You need some sort of practical manual and mental exercise for building the fundamental skills that it takes to actually participate in this genre. Enter Ted Reed's Syncopation. This method, the long title actually being Progressive Steps to Syncopation for the Modern Drummer by Ted Reed, published in 1958, still for me and many drummers contains a limitless wealth of jazz drumming method. Now I'm very cautious here to say method because just doing this still doesn't make you a jazz drummer. You need to do that. You have to be steeped in the tradition of jazz music and play a majority of gigs, a lot of gigs, in this style. But you can convincingly imitate the style of this music and get paid as a musician, sustain life, and make a living playing the drums. And that's what we're about here mostly on this channel, is taking the skill sets that you have, the experience that you have, and rounding that out so that you can get more gigs. To employ this method, start by establishing a typical jazz ride cymbal pattern and tune 4 on the hi-hat. Now, a lot of people know this as spangalang, one way or the other. I think you know what I'm talking about. Now, while doing that, you take your left hand and you read Ted Reed's Syncopation. Now, it's important to note you go to the back of the book. In my copy, it's on page 38, and they're the page-long etudes. And if you're not familiar with doing this, you don't want to play the whole thing all at once. You want to read one measure at a time while keeping time. In other words, establish spangalang, as it's called, and then play one bar and coast, quote-unquote coast. So just keep playing time. Play one bar of the etude, one bar at a time. Go back and play that bar till it's comfortable. Go on to the next bar. Play that bar. Play some time. Play that bar. Play some time. So on and so forth until you're 2 measures at a time, 4 measures at a time, and then you do the entire exercise like this. Now go back in. Do that same whole method, except instead of the left hand on the snare drum, play the right foot on the bass drum. And now the real fun begins. And don't let this twist you up too much. Just try it, one bar at a time, 2 bars at a time, 1 line at a time, etc. You're going to play the quote-unquote short notes on the snare drum with the left hand. And these are just the eighth notes, or so-called short notes. And you're going to play the long notes with the right foot. Now that's going to be quarter notes, eighth tied to eighth, and dotted quarter notes. 3 different note values in the quote-unquote long note value section. So just eighths with the snare drum, everything else with the bass drum. And as always, remember, if you like the video, if you got any sort of value from it, help us out, hit the like button, subscribe, come back, hit the little alarm bell if you're not on the email list so that you can know exactly every time a new video comes out, and drop a comment, let me know what you want to hear next here on Drum Tip Tuesday. Thanks. Goes to shit, that's okay, because this could be, one rehearsal. It just takes a few minutes. You don't actually have that much material.